Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating chapter on how globalization and social change intersect. The forces we're exploring today are literally scripting the way we live, work, and think. We're going to decode this massive web of global interconnectivity and see exactly how it impacts both entire nations and us as individuals.
To make sense of this huge topic, we'll break it down into 5 key parts: making sense of globalization, asking if these interconnections are actually new, diving into the economic dimensions, exploring the knowledge and finance economy, and finally, looking at the communication revolution.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, making sense of globalization.
You know, globalization isn't just some abstract theory for economists. It dominates our daily headlines. We see it in the news all the time. On one hand, you've got cultural shifts, like English merging with local languages to create hybrids like Hinglish. On the other, we're looking at global health data tracking shifting diabetic populations across India and China. It just goes to show how these massive global trends directly shape our local culture and even our public health.
To really grasp how this works, sociology uses something called the sociological imagination. It's basically a tool that lets us link huge macro-level global changes to the micro-level everyday realities of our lives. It forces us to ask, how exactly is a peasant in a remote village directly tied to shifting global markets? This zoom-in, zoom-out approach is super powerful. So at the macro level, you have big bureaucratic policies, like the Indian government deciding to remove quantitative import restrictions back in April 2001. But when you zoom into the micro level, that exact policy is the reason you can walk down the street and choose between a Chinese pear, an Australian apple, or imported frozen chips at your local fruit stall. The policy is global, but the bite of that apple? That's completely personal.
But we have to look at this impartially, because this process creates wildly different realities depending on who you are. While affluent consumers get all these amazing new choices, traditional workers often face a harsh loss of livelihood. For example, women silk spinners in Bihar lost jobs to cheaper imported yarn. Gum collectors in Gujarat were displaced by imports from Sudan. And from rag pickers losing work due to imported waste paper to traditional fishing communities dealing with massive global vessels, the disruptions are very real. Globalization affects all of us, but it definitely doesn't affect us all in the same way.
Which brings us to Section 2, are global interconnections actually new?
The short answer? Absolutely not. History is just full of global links. Think about the ancient Silk Route connecting India to China, Persia, Egypt, and Rome. Or get this, Panini, the great Sanskrit grammarian, was actually of Afghan origin. We even have records of the Chinese scholar Yijing learning Sanskrit in Java on his way to India. And of course, the colonial era brought massive global networks of resource extraction and mass migrations of indentured laborers. So yeah, the world has been talking to itself for a very, very long time.
In fact, there's this ancient Sanskrit parable of the Kupamandaka. It translates to the frog in the well. This frog knows absolutely nothing of the outside world and is suspicious of everything beyond its own little bubble. It serves as a timeless warning against isolationism. As scholar Amartya Sen pointed out, human history would have been incredibly limited if we had all just lived like frogs in a well.
Let's move right along to Section 3, the economic dimensions.
So if these connections aren't new, what makes modern globalization so different? Well, a crucial piece of the puzzle is liberalization. For decades after independence, India heavily protected its local businesses from foreign competition. But starting in July 1991, everything shifted. Liberalization brought a series of economic reforms, where India intentionally removed state regulations to integrate much more deeply into the global market.
Now, opening up an economy like that often means taking loans from international institutions, like the IMF. But these loans usually come with strings attached, which are known as structural adjustments. Countries basically have to commit to specific economic measures, and that frequently means making tough cuts to state spending on social sectors, things like health, education, and social security. It's a massive systemic shift in how a state manages its resources.
Another huge driver of all this economic globalization is the rise of transnational corporations, or TNCs. These are companies whose operations literally crisscross the globe. They aren't just exporting goods. They're producing, marketing, and strategizing across multiple borders all at once, always oriented towards global markets and, of course, global profits.
And their reach is almost unbelievable when you really think about it. Just take a look around your house right now, and you'll see the impact of TNCs in almost everything you touch. The shoes in your closet, the shampoo in your shower, the car parked outside, right down to the processed food,
tea, and milk powder sitting in your kitchen. TNCs are just completely woven into the fabric of our everyday lives.
All right, on to Section 4, the knowledge and finance economy.
This brings us to a totally new paradigm. We've largely transitioned away from an industrial economy, which was all about the physical production of heavy, material goods, to what's called a weightless or knowledge economy. Today, a huge chunk of the workforce is dealing with information, computer software, media, marketing, and design. It's an economy built on ideas and data rather than steel and coal.
And this is perfectly paired with an electronic economy that makes the globalization of finance possible. Because of globally integrated financial markets, banks and investors can instantaneously shift billions of dollars internationally with just the click of a mouse. There's this endless 24-hour cycle of trading across capital markets in cities like New York, Tokyo, London, and Mumbai. Wealth is literally moving at the speed of light.
Finally, let's hit Section 5, the communication revolution.
None of this would be possible without a true revolution in telecommunications. Mobile phones, the internet, satellites, they've effectively caused a compression of time and space. Think about how wild it is that someone sitting in Bangalore can instantly talk, share massive documents, and collaborate in real time with someone in New York. This tech infrastructure is the backbone of our digitally networked global society.
To really grasp the mind-boggling scale of this change, just consider India's timeline. Back in the year 2000, there were only about 3 million internet subscribers. Fast forward to today, that number has exploded to a staggering 700 million users. This massive digital footprint is the exact engine driving initiatives like Digital India, aiming to build a fully empowered knowledge economy.
So, as we wrap up our explainer of this chapter on the complexities and dual realities of globalization, I want to leave you with something to chew on. We've seen how macro policies put foreign apples on your table, how global shifts disrupt local jobs, and how a weightless economy connects us all, instantly. As this global web just keeps expanding, where do you see your own life within this vast network? Honestly, what part of your everyday world is truly local anymore? Thanks for exploring this chapter with us, and keep questioning those connections.